All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into something that's been causing quite a stir online: cancel culture. Or should we say accountability culture?
Oh, I like where this is going already.
Well, you sent in this YouTube video, a commentary on some recent influencer drama, and it got me thinking.
Influencer drama, huh? Never a dull moment in that world.
You know it. This commenter, they're taking a pretty unique angle. They're diving into SmokeyGlow's reaction to, well, what went down with Hannah.
Ah, yes, that whole situation. Lots of opinions flying around about that one.
And this commenter, they're not shying away from sharing theirs. They're basically saying what we call cancel culture is actually more of a reckoning.
Interesting. A reckoning. That word carries a lot of weight, doesn't it?
It does. And I think it reveals a lot about how this commenter views the whole situation. They're arguing it's not about just shutting people down randomly, but holding folks accountable for, well, historically accepted prejudices that are finally being challenged.
Hmm, I see. So they're framing it as a kind of course correction, a response to past wrongs.
Exactly. But here's the thing. They're not totally on board with cancel culture either.
Oh. Sounds like we've got a bit of a paradox on our hands.
You do. On one hand, they're calling cancel culture this destructive force that can ruin lives.
Right, right. I mean, we've all seen those stories.
But then they turn around and say it's a necessary tool to fight injustice. It's like they're caught between these two completely opposite ideas.
It's a tension a lot of us are grappling with, right?
Yeah.
How do we balance the need for accountability with, well, the very real potential for things to go too far? It's tough.
Totally. And to make it even more complicated, this commenter actually brings up specific examples.
Oh, really? Like what?
People losing jobs, friends, even family over things they've said or done. They really paint this stark picture of the consequences of getting canceled.
That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, are these examples representative of a larger trend, or are they more like isolated incidents? It's always good to consider the full context.
Yeah, good point. There's always more to the story, right? But there's this other thing that really struck me, their reaction to the idea of approaching people with different opinions with, love and compassion.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
How did they react to that?
They practically scoffed at it, like it was a ridiculous notion.
Wow, that's pretty strong. It makes you wonder what experiences they've had that led them to that perspective. Maybe they've tried that approach and been met with hostility or just felt like it wasn't effective.
I hadn't thought of it like that. It's a good reminder that everyone comes to these conversations with their own baggage, their own history.
Absolutely. And this commenter definitely brings their own perspective to the table. They even make some pretty bold comparisons,
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
like contrasting what they see as, well, excessive sensitivity in Western cultures with the harsh realities of life in other parts of the world, like North Korea or some Muslim-majority countries.
Right. And it kind of felt like that comparison was minimizing the very real issues marginalized groups face, even in Western societies.
It's a slippery slope to start comparing different forms of oppression, isn't it? Like, it's not a competition.
Exactly. And you can acknowledge that injustice exists in many forms without having to rank them. But here's another thing I noticed. As the video goes on, the commenter's tone gets more and more, well, I say frustrated, almost angry.
Hmm, interesting. It's like their emotional state is directly mirroring the intensity of their argument. It makes you think about how emotions can impact the way a message is received.
Like you might hear the words, but are you really listening?
Right. If someone's yelling at you, it's pretty hard to be receptive to what they're saying, even if you agree with the basic idea. But amidst all that anger, there were moments where the commenters seemed to be longing for something different, something better.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
They talked about wanting a society where people just didn't need to be held accountable because they were inherently good.
Yeah. It was almost like they were acknowledging the limitations of their own argument in a way, recognizing that maybe this accountability culture is a symptom of a deeper problem.
It adds a whole other layer to their perspective, doesn't it? Like maybe their critique isn't just about protecting individuals from consequences, but also about striving for a better world.
Now you're talking.
Hmm.
And speaking of a better world, they also brought up online bullying and harassment.
Ah, yes. That's a whole other can of worms.
Right. And they were suggesting that sometimes holding someone accountable can cross a line into something really harmful.
It's an important distinction to make. Accountability should be about, well, addressing harmful actions and making things right, not about just punishing people or attacking them personally.
It's a tough balance to find, especially online where things can get out of hand so fast.
Definitely. but it's a conversation worth having. And speaking of conversations, I couldn't help but notice how the commenters seem to be, well, calling out other creators.
Oh, yeah. Like SmokeyGlow, whose video sparked this whole response.
Right. They seem to think SmokeyGlow is being too lenient on those being held accountable, which is interesting because, in a way, they're holding her accountable for her opinions.
It's like accountability inception.
Exactly. Makes you wonder where it all ends, right?
It does. Okay, so we've covered a lot here. The commenters' take on accountability culture, their criticisms of other creators, and those thought-provoking comparisons they made. But there's one more piece I want to dig into before we move on.
Let me guess.
Yeah.
Their thoughts on how societal differences play into this whole debate.
Bingo. They have some strong opinions about, well, specific types of oppression and which groups are most affected, and I think it's worth unpacking all of that carefully.
Sounds like a great place to pick up next time.
It is. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into cancel culture and accountability.
All right, let's jump back into this commenter's take on accountability culture. Remember where we left off, their views on societal differences.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They had a lot to say about that, especially when it came to race and racism.
Right. Some pretty bold statements there. Like, remember when they claimed that racism is mainly directed at white people?
Yeah, that one definitely made me do a double take.
It's a statement that requires careful consideration, right? Like, it's important to acknowledge that prejudice can exist in any direction, impacting any group. But to claim that white people are the primary victims of racism.
Yeah, it feels like it ignores the historical and systemic context of racism, the centuries of oppression and discrimination faced by people of color.
Exactly. It's like comparing a stub toe to, well, carrying a heavy weight for your entire life. Just not the same level of pain.
It's a powerful analogy, and it highlights the importance of approaching these conversations with sensitivity, right? Recognizing that different groups have experienced different levels of power and privilege throughout history.
Absolutely. It's not about denying that individuals from any group can experience prejudice, but about understanding the broader societal structures that perpetuate certain forms of discrimination.
And speaking of societal structures, the commenter also talked about how cancel culture is a uniquely Western phenomenon. Like it's tied to what they see as this excessive sensitivity and political correctness in Western societies.
Yeah, it's a point worth considering. Cultural norms and values around free speech, tolerance, accountability, those can definitely vary across different societies. But at the same time, online platforms and social media are global. Right.
That's true. People from all over the world are participating in these online debates, shaping these conversations.
Exactly. It's not just a Western issue. And it's worth noting that calls for accountability and critiques of power dynamics, those aren't unique to Western cultures either. We've seen movements and individuals throughout history across different societies, challenging injustice and demanding change.
So, while the specific forms of cancel culture might look different depending on the cultural context, the underlying desire for accountability and social justice, that seems more universal.
Right. It's a human thing, not just a Western thing.
Okay, so we've unpacked their take on societal differences, their controversial statements about racism, their idea that cancel culture is a Western phenomenon. But before we move on, I want to circle back to something they said earlier. Remember, they're longing for a society where accountability is less necessary.
Oh, right. Right. That utopian vision where everyone's just inherently good.
Yeah. Is that even possible?
It's a compelling idea. But it raises some questions, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, can we ever truly achieve a society where harmful actions are so rare that we don't need any mechanisms for accountability?
And even if we could, wouldn't there still be disagreements, conflicts? How do we deal with those without some form of accountability?
It's almost like they're imagining a world where human nature itself is fundamentally different. No greed, no selfishness, no desire for power.
A beautiful dream, maybe. But a little unrealistic, right?
Probably.
Mhm.
But even if it's unattainable, it speaks to something deeper, this longing for a more just and harmonious world, where accountability is less about punishment and more about restorative justice.
Restorative justice instead of punishment. I like that. Gets to the heart of what's at stake in this whole debate, doesn't it?
Definitely. It's about addressing harm, promoting healing, but also acknowledging the complexities of human behavior, the potential for growth and change.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've analyzed their arguments, challenged their assumptions, explored the broader context of cancel culture and accountability.
We've really dug into the complexities of societal differences, the nuances of online discourse, the emotions that drive these conversations.
It's been a journey. But we're not done yet. There's still more to unpack from this one YouTube video, more insights to glean.
So buckle up, everyone. We're diving into part 3 of our deep dive into cancel culture and accountability.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive on cancel culture, or should we say accountability culture. We've been dissecting this YouTube video where the commenter really lays into SmokeyGlow for her take on the whole Hannah situation, and man, do they have some opinions.
They sure do. It's been fascinating to pick apart not just the original event itself, but also how everyone's been interpreting it and reacting to it.
It really is. Like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing something new and thought-provoking at each turn. But one thing that's really stood out to me throughout this whole video, the commenter puts a ton of emphasis on personal responsibility.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Like they're saying, hey, you made your bed, now you got to lie in it. Once you mess up, there are no second chances.
Exactly. It's kind of harsh, don't you think? Like there's no room for growth or change, no chance for redemption.
Right. It definitely makes you question the purpose of accountability, doesn't it? Is it just about punishment? Or is it also about giving people a chance to understand the harm they've caused, to make amends, to become better people?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I'm not so sure this commenter really answers it. They seem way more focused on the consequences than on any possibility for, like, personal transformation.
That's a good point. It's one of the main criticisms of cancel culture, right? It can become less about promoting understanding and more about public shaming and getting revenge.
And speaking of trying to create a better world, remember how the commenter suggested that maybe we need to move away from this whole culture of accountability? Like, if we could just make a world where everyone is inherently good, then we wouldn't need all these systems for calling out bad behavior.
Yeah, I remember. It's a nice thought, but let's be real. Is it even possible?
Right? We're all human. We're capable of good and bad. And sometimes, even with the best intentions, people mess up.
Exactly. So maybe accountability isn't about expecting perfection, but about having systems in place to deal with the fact that sometimes people make mistakes.
That makes sense. It's like having laws. We don't expect everyone to be perfect angels, but if you break the rules, there are consequences, right?
Precisely. And just like those laws and social norms change over time, so do our ideas about accountability. What might have been considered acceptable behavior a few years ago might be totally unacceptable now.
So true. Which I guess kind of shows how cancel culture can reflect changing values in society and a greater awareness of social justice.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It emphasizes how crucial it is to keep talking about these things, to think critically about them, and to try to create a culture of accountability that is both fair and compassionate. Not an easy feat, for sure.
Well said. And I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive. We've certainly covered a lot, haven't we? From dissecting the commenter's passionate arguments to grappling with the complexities of cancel culture and what it really means to hold each other accountable.
It's been a wild ride through the world of online discourse and the challenges of navigating these sensitive topics. But hopefully, our conversation has encouraged some critical thinking and helps shed light on the many different perspectives out there.
Absolutely. So, as a final thought, we'll leave you with this. How has this deep dive and the commenter's unique take on accountability culture changed your understanding of online criticism and social justice? Where do you draw the line between holding someone accountable and, well, just being outraged? We encourage you to keep thinking about these questions, to engage in thoughtful conversations, and to keep challenging your own assumptions as we all try to navigate this complex and ever-changing world.